Mixing with Mike mixing tip, using attack and release times to set the front-back positioning in a mix. The whole idea of working with the attack and release times on a compressor, and the way that I'm going to show you this particular technique is to help set the front-back positioning of the music. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to bypass this compressor here. It's just at a reset position. And what we have here is just drums, bass, a couple guitars, and at some point later we'll have some keyboards kind of filling in. So just from this simple example, I want to show you how you can create some front-back movement. So at this point, when you listen, all the sounds pretty much sit in the same front-back plane. Maybe the drums are just very slightly behind. Okay, and part of this is done just by setting the balances. So I have like just some subtractive EQ here and some balancing, and now I'm going to put on a layer of compression. So where we're going to start here is with the drums. And one of the first things I need to figure out here is what my release time settings are. So I'm going to set myself to bars and beats and my grid to be quarter notes. I'm going to highlight a quarter note in grid mode. And then I'm going to take a look at what that value is in milliseconds, which is 521 milliseconds. So I'm going to round that off basically. And what we'll do is we'll start, that would give us a 520 millisecond time for a quarter note. Eighth note would be 260, 16th note would be 130. And so this is going to be my fundamental starting place for the drum. So actually where I'm going to start here, just to kind of set the overall vibe for the drums, is to just start here with a compressor just on the stereo mix stem. So all the drums are feeding into this. I'm going to reset the compressor just so you can see it starting from the beginning. Now what I want to do here is, if I want the drums here to be really aggressive, I'm going to have a slow attack to allow the transient to kind of pop through. If I want the drums to sit a little bit behind the speakers though and feature the guitars a little bit more in the mix, I can still get a big sound with the drums, but it'll just be not as up front in the mix. And that's kind of what I was thinking I would go for here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a 260 timing. Okay, and then I'm going to start with a short attack. Let's just kind of go with a really fast attack here, and a very light ratio. So the ratio I want to keep light because I want to be able to set my threshold low, and that way all the key rhythmic points trigger the compression, and not any one of them really over triggers or over creates too much gain reduction. So I'll set myself up here with like a little bit, like about 2 dB a gain, makeup gain. So this way you see with the light ratio I'm getting a consistent 2 dB of gain reduction. Maybe I'll increase it a little bit more and raise my threshold up a little bit. Now this is with a fast attack, so if I take the same approach and I do a slower attack, like say about 10 milliseconds, the drums come forward. So the more I want to set them back, the more I want to set this attack to be a faster time. So let me start with like maybe like a 3 millisecond attack. So it's not totally cutting off the peak, but kind of cutting it down enough that I can get a little bit more of a consistent gain reduction. So if I want this actually to be a little bit more open sounding, then I can go to a 16th note release, which would be 130. And now I'll go back and forth. Well, it won't sit back forward, okay? I have to do it manually. So the 130 release sounds a little bit too fast, a little bit too open sounding. I like the 260 release time because it gives me a little more body in the drum. So I'm going to use this as my sort of starting point. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this stereo thing and I'm just going to copy it right over here to the overhead mics. I'm going to take this out and then I'm going to apply this basic starting place here to the individual tracks. I'm going to copy the settings here, and now I'm going to paste this in to the kick drum. And so if I paste my settings here, now what I'm going to be doing with each of these tracks is I'm just going to use those exact same settings for attack and release. And all I'm going to adjust is the threshold. And here, this is a sub kick. Now, this is really important because what I want to do here is I want to capture the same. I want the same exact pumping and breathing and attack release settings for everything here in the mix. And then we got overheads. Let's just check this out. And I'm going to copy this over to the room tracks. Maybe I'll squash that a little bit more. All right, so let's go back here to the beginning and just A/B that in and out. Now, it actually sounds a bit more present, but the attack kind of cuts back a little bit. So you can hear a bit of air that is brought into the drums. So the gain makeup, when it's not compressing, is going to make the air rise, and that's kind of what you're hearing there. So when I A/B this quickly in and out, it's not necessarily going to sound so much like it's much more in the back. But as we start to add in other instruments, you'll start to hear that a little more clearly. But let's A/B it again. Actually, it does. I'm sorry. Just listening back to it here, you really hear the air and the openness of the room. Right? So there is definitely more depth to the sound. So now with the bass, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this as a starting place or as a template here, and I'm going to start to bring in us. Now, what I want to do here with the bass, I want the bass to sit in front of the drums a little bit more. So I'm going to slow down the attack. So just by swinging that attack, I can hear how this sits a little more up front. And I'm going to type in do like a quarter note release time. Let it be a little bit smoother sounding. So these change the release. This changes the release characteristic, the shape of the release characteristic, and this is just like a warming, sort of like a tube warming kind of effect on the, or more like a transformer kind of warming effect on the output. So now what I have here, with and without, for these guys. So you can see how the bass and the drums are kind of pretty much on the same level. Now, listen to the depth in the 3D, how it opens up. You can hear how the bass comes a little more forward with the slower attack. And now normally, like to bring something forward like this, one of the other ways that you can do this is by making the release time faster. With basses, this typically doesn't work as well. It will work better for guitars, for rhythm guitars. So you can hear how this kind of raises the bass a little bit up in the speakers, and I don't really want that. I want it to kind of sit a little bit more solid in the low mids, a little more sustaining. So I'll try that again. So you can hear how more present it is, right? But this is going to be warmer, so this will allow the guitars to kind of bring it a little more forward. So the release time, not just the attack time, also has a play in how far something sits back. So if I went with an even longer, like a faster attack and even longer release on the drums, they would sit back even farther. And you could just kind of keep going with that. But this is the basic formula. So now let's pick up with an acoustic guitar. So again, I'm kind of starting with the same, I have to get the track numbers formatted. I guess I can just drag this one here, right over to the acoustic. And so I'm leaving all the tracks in here just to kind of show you, because I can, if I go even slower with the attack, like you can hear how that acoustic just starts to jump to the front. Now part of it is you got more gain reduction, obviously. But I'm going to go with a faster release time. And then I'm going to copy this over to the another electric track, a Telecaster, or an electric track. This is an acoustic. And if I set this up to be like an optical release, it'll kind of shape it a little bit faster as well. The optical, if you're unfamiliar with the Renaissance compressor, the optical electro has a different characteristic shape depending upon how much gain reduction you have. So at a certain point, it will, in other words, instead of being a linear slope on the release, it'll either start faster and finish slower, or start slower and finish faster. So sort of S-curve shaped, a little bit more than linear. And so as a result, what you get with one is a little more sustain, and what you get with the other is a little bit more of a quicker initial release. In the end, the total release time is the same, but the shape is slightly varied. And that characteristic changes the more gain reduction that you have. So you can just kind of feel out the difference. So I'm going to go with the optical settings here. So here we have now drums, bass, and guitars. So it's bypassed. And now you can feel a little bit more of the depth. So there's also some other guitars in here, which I'm going to do a very similar thing to. I'll just kind of cop along these guys. Maybe because these guys are a little bit heavier, I'll go with more of an electronic setting, and go with like a more of a 260 release time. So I'll kind of do it that way, and kind of so they have a slightly varied characteristic from the other two main guitars. Now there's also a keyboard in this section, and what the keyboard does, the keyboard is just kind of playing a sustained note. So in that case, I'm just going to go with a really fast attack, but I want to have like a really long release time on it. So I'm just going to set this up here and kind of copy that. And helps if you open it up so you can hear it. There we go. So because it's just kind of holding out some sustaining notes, we just kind of, you could see like a little bit of the pumping movement here. But this will help to set it a little bit, set it back in the speakers a little bit. Okay, so now let's take these basic tracks here. We'll come back maybe to some of these other guys, in a second, and let's just take a look at the most open area, which is the verse, and then you can hear the difference with and without. So you can hear the flatness, right? There's a lack of aliveness, and the aliveness comes from a feeling of depth, right? The 3D perception. So if you're having trouble listening or being able to hear what I'm talking about, notice the position, grab onto one instrument and notice in its context when everything is bypassed the positioning, and then listen for how that position changes relative to the other instruments. So what you should hear is that the drums sort of set back a little bit, the bass sort of sinks down a little bit actually. The guitars, especially the two main guitars in the verse, they kind of jump forward, and these electric guitars are kind of somewhere in between on the wide kind of side of things. So the basic idea, and while the effect can sometimes be more dramatic than other times, it depends how well tweaked in the mix is. This is just basic layer of levels, panning, and subtractive EQ, nothing more than that. As we start to add in other parts, we can place them sort of in between. So when we create these small separations and they start to accumulate, then eventually what starts to happen is you start to create the openness in the space that allows you to put whatever reverbs and things like that you want in the mix. So anyway, this is a little example, quick example for how you would use compression and the attack and release settings to set the front back positioning of a mix.